We just sang some words, one of my favorites that we do in this song. Favorite part says, "The gates of hell will not prevail. Your church is still alive and well. This gospel truth I live to tell." And I think it's a big deal. That's not just our church sing-along time, but it's a moment where we're speaking truths into the world. I think that's a big one. That one always sticks with me. Now, I've heard that there's this way that people get caught when they do something wrong. It goes something like this. Someone will, maybe they'll go illegally hunt or illegally fish. They shoot something out of season, or they catch something in a space that they're not allowed to fish in, or wrong times, whatever it may be. And the ways that they tend to get caught most frequently is through social media. Because if it's worth shooting or catching and keeping, then it's worth showing off, right? And so they show it off, and then DNR officers and investigators are kind of watching that stuff. They're looking for things that maybe stand out as being a little bit different, and then they go and they look into it. They kind of investigate and try to get to what's actually going on. And recently I read a story about a guy out in Louisiana who's kind of in a bad spot right now because he bragged on his Facebook about a very large fish that he had caught, but the fish that he caught was caught in a wrong place at the wrong time. And so some agents show up to his home. They begin interviewing him about the legality of what he did. He lies to them about where he got the fish. And now he's in a situation where he's facing up to 10 years in prison for illegally fishing, and then it's, for lying to agents. Because lying is a big deal, right? It still happens all the time, though. There's a woman out in Denver last year who's a prosecutor who was disbarred because she created a fake text message thread and she altered some phone records, all because she was trying to falsely accuse a male colleague of hers of sexual harassment. And she made the entire thing up. She lied. And now she's lost her license. There's another woman who was found guilty of lying to federal agents. This happened last year. She accused her ex-spouse of accessing her bank account from space. Now, that part's not the weird part, because her ex-spouse was an astronaut, okay? So that was the normal part, all right? But she made up all the evidence. She's trying to take out her ex, and now she's in prison, because lying can have some pretty big consequences. Unfortunately, this isn't just a secular issue, because you can find stories like these in Christian circles as well. There were some leaders of an American church denomination who are now in prison because they ran a $22 million scheme where they were targeting military members and veterans, enrolling them in sham seminary programs that would drain their GI Bill benefits. And the charges that these leaders faced was a list that looked like bank fraud, wire fraud, false tax returns, misuse of Virginia education benefits. All of that is really just a bunch of lies. Last year, there was some church leaders down in Florida who were arrested for a $50 million scheme where they forced people into working call centers to solicit donations under deceptive pretenses. And their charges included things like forced labor and money laundering, human trafficking, and fraud. And all of this is done by a church. And we could call it a lot of things, but I think lying is an applicable word. Last May, not last month, but a year ago, May 2025, there's a guy named Josh Buyas who resigned after his church found evidence that he was using multiple fake social media accounts and emails to anonymously attack and then spread unsubstantiated and sinful remarks against fellow Christian leaders. He's a leader of a church. He found this extra church ministry thing that was doing really well. But he created burner accounts so he could publicly and anonymously slander other leaders. We could call that a lot of things, but lying would work. In every society, both past and present, telling the truth has been judged as an important personal value. And yet, according to surveys, Americans lie all the time. In fact, surveys say that Americans don't just lie all the time, we lie for no reason. Sometimes we lie just to lie. Why? Why do we lie? It's a big question, and I think it's worth pursuing. Maybe you lie, or at least you think you lie for the right reasons. Because there are good reasons to lie. Maybe you lie to protect someone that you care about because you don't want to hurt their feelings, or you're just trying to be nice. Maybe you lie when something valuable or important is on the line. There's this old thought experiment that happens in ethics classes where they set up a scenario that looks something like you living in Germany, hiding Jews in your basement, and then soldiers show up at your door asking questions. Is it appropriate to lie in a situation like that? Is it wrong to lie about something if you're protecting someone from a real threat or from harm? Would it be wrong to lie to someone to protect themselves? Is it wrong to lie to your kids when you're protecting them from the weights that they shouldn't have to carry in their young life? What about the little lies we tell our kids just for fun because we're trying to enjoy life with them in our home? It almost seems like there are some lies that are right. Like maybe there's some lies that are even harmless. Maybe. But I'm not really even talking about that kind of stuff, because if we're honest, which is a very fun thing to say when we're talking about lying, but if we're honest, those aren't the lies that make up the majority of our lies, do they? We like to think that our lies are protecting others, but the reality is that our lies are mainly used to protect ourselves. And so why do we lie? Well, I think most of the time we lie because we're trying to avoid punishment, or we don't want to get caught. I think sometimes we lie because we're trying to buy time, or we're trying to dodge something. Sometimes we lie because we're trying to avoid conflict. Sometimes we lie to preserve a relationship. Sometimes we lie to get our way. Sometimes we may lie even for the purpose of hurting someone else just for our own satisfaction. I think most of the time when we lie, we're selfish. And I think the real reason we lie is because we want to look better on the outside than what we actually are on the inside. Our issue isn't that we lie to protect others, we lie to protect ourselves. We're constantly looking out for number one. And if there are words that I could say that could make a situation work out best for me, then it doesn't matter that those words contradict truth. It doesn't matter that those words contradict how I feel or even who I am. If I can put together this string of words that will somehow make my life better, then I will say the words even if they are a lie. Because it's all about me. And it's all about self-preservation. I think we lie because we want to look better on the outside than we are on the inside. I think we lie to hide who we really are. Which brings us back to a beatitude that we talked about a few weeks ago. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are those who care more about their heart being pure than the facade of looking good. Blessed are those who are honest with themselves internally and then honest about that to others externally. And I mean, if we follow that train of thought, it's not a far reach to say, or to go from blessed are the pure in heart to then saying, blessed are those who just tell the truth. Blessed are those who are truth tellers. Blessed are the ones who aren't hypocrites. Blessed are the ones who are true to their God and who are true to themselves and who are true with the words that they say. Earlier I said that every society has valued truth-telling. Every society sees honesty as an important virtue, but there hasn't ever been a culture or a religion that has got it right. There was a problem in Jesus' day, and their problem was exactly the same as our problem. It's corruption of the heart. And as we get into Jesus' words, here's the big idea. Jesus calls his followers to radical truthfulness and integrity. And the reason he does that is because that's how the world will know him. If the church can get this right, if the church was made up of people who were radical truth tellers with integrity, then that would make us stand out like a light on a hill on a pitch black night. It would be like salt shaken on a very bland world. And if we get this wrong, we'll get to that. Here's how Jesus says it in Matthew 5. He says, again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, Do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Now, at first glance, these verses don't seem to have anything to do with lying. Looks like it's more of an issue of making oaths or swearing or using God's name, and that's what it sounds like. But an oath is a promise that you're telling the truth. When you make an oath to someone, you're guaranteeing, you're promising something to them that can be trusted and upheld. And to swear is a similar thing. To swear is strongly pledging to perform a future action or strongly affirming that what was said is indeed the truth. It's using words to make promises. It's using words to proclaim truth. Oaths and swearing are tied to truth-telling. One guy I read this week said it this way. He said, oaths arise because men are so often liars. We make oaths and we swear things to look trustworthy when the assumption is that no one is trustworthy. And so we invoke God's name or we make promises on different things to add credibility to our words. Now, Jesus' words are not directly pulled from the Old Testament, but there's some deep roots here. Truth-telling is one of the 10 commandments. You may remember it. It says, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. It's in Proverbs where it says, the Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in those who tell the truth. Detest is a really strong word, but this is one of God's top 10 rules. And I don't think I want to be in a spot, and I don't think you want to be in a spot where God would say he detests you. And so don't lie. It's not a simple suggestion from Jesus of how to live. Lying is being in direct opposition with God. Now the thing is, when Jesus says all this, people in his day knew this was true. Religious people knew when to tell the truth. They knew they weren't supposed to break their oaths or the things that they would swear, and so they came up with ways to get around it. They reasoned and they created clever loopholes to appear pious and truthful while evading the commitments they were pretending to make. They even had some writings that helped lay out the rules for how to get around their oaths and their promises, but not, have to fulfill them. And as long as you said the right combination of words, then you could escape your oath, which I think is just gross, especially from religious leaders. And I think this is why Jesus calls them whitewashed tombs. These people were all about looking good on the outside, and they didn't really even give a rip at all for how they were on the inside. Just a moment ago, we said we lie because we want to look better on the outside than what we are on the inside. That is exactly the Pharisees of Jesus' day. Obsessed with the exterior, careless with the interior. They wanted to look like someone who was trustworthy, but they didn't care about actually being trustworthy. And so they would make oaths and they would swear by heaven or they would swear by earth or they would swear by Jerusalem because you can't own any of those things. And you can't sell those things when you break your oath. You can't have to pay up, right? It's kind of like swearing on your mother's grave, right? In their mind, these are oaths that have zero meaning. It's a glaring problem. They would knowingly lie in their oaths by swearing on things that they knew weren't binding. It's a joke. Jesus actually goes deeper on this later in his ministry, towards the end of his life, when he's really going after some of these Pharisees. Matthew records Jesus as saying, "Woe to you, blind guides." He's saying, you guys are telling everyone else how to live, and you don't even know where you're going. You're trying to lead people to God, and you don't even know what's happening. You're clueless about where you're taking them. Jesus says, you say that if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But anyone who swears by the gold of the temple is bound by that oath. You see how petty this is? How simple it is. In their minds, they thought, well, you could potentially own gold. You can't own the temple. So just don't swear on the gold, swear on the temple itself. It's ridiculous. And so he says, you blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You also say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing. But anyone who swears by the gift on the altar is bound by that oath. Can you see The hypocrisy of all of this. It's ridiculous. It's verbal gymnastics. And he says, you blind men, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, anyone who swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it. And anyone who swears by the temple swears by it and by the one who dwells on it. Anyone who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it. Jesus just picks the whole thing apart. The Pharisees loved their rules, and they especially loved their loopholes to get around the rules. And it sounds ridiculous to hear the way that they would use language to avoid accountability. It sounds ridiculous to hear all the ways they would work around God's rules. Actually, I don't know that it sounds all that ridiculous. I think it sounds exactly like the culture that we're in. It sounds like the legalese that we've created in our culture to get around anything inconvenient. It sounds like putting things in fine print so that we're not held accountable. Because we're not so interested in being righteous, we're more interested in working around our shortcomings. If you guys know me, you know I'm a big fan of college football, and you know that there's been a big story in the news the last month surrounding a quarterback from Texas Tech who's never played a single down for them. Last 2 years, he was playing for University of Cincinnati. He's gotten in trouble because he bet over 9,000 times on collegiate sports, totaling at least $90,000, with at least 40 of those bets involving teams that he was a part of. And he's been in the news because the NCAA suspended him. But then he went and found a court that would override their suspension and allow him to continue playing college sports. And it's been a mess, and it's I don't even know if it's over yet. It changes every week. He's in a bad spot now. But his story isn't all that uncommon. I mean, he just found a court system that would take an argument of his to explain away whatever behavior it is that he got caught in. The Pharisees did that kind of stuff. We do that kind of stuff. Pharisees used wording to weasel out of oaths that they made, and it feels like hypocrisy because it's lying. It's kind of like when a child crosses their fingers behind their backs as if whatever they say next has no bearing and it doesn't matter. You wouldn't tolerate that with your kids. Jesus doesn't tolerate it with us. We lie because we want to look better on the outside than what we are on the inside, and Jesus challenges that idea big time. Jesus' followers are called to radical truthfulness and integrity. And so going back to Matthew 5, Jesus combats these strategies by pointing out that everything belongs to God anyways. It doesn't matter how you say it. To swear by anything is to swear by God, for in God, in some way, he stands behind everything. He says even the hairs on our head have been ordained by God to be a certain color. It seems as if God has been changing his mind about the color of my hair lately. And it seems like maybe God has ordained some of your hair to not show up anymore, right? It doesn't matter what you swear by. Jesus says all oaths are solemn pledges to fulfill the truth. That if God owns everything, then every oath must reflect his character of truth and how we honor the truth. And the logic can be extended to everything in heaven and on earth, even crossed fingers and fine print and the things we don't consider oaths. Jesus says your word is binding. If you're going to be a Jesus follower, then you're going to live differently. Your word will be your bond. Truth-telling is a significant part of following Jesus. There is no room for lying in the movement of the one who arrived, according to John's gospel, full of truth and grace. That gives us the answer to why truth is so important. Truth is a big deal because without truth, there isn't grace. Grace requires truth. Because you don't need grace unless you somehow come face to face with the truth of your sin and your mistakes. Telling the truth is important because truth brings us to a place of healing. And so we are supposed to be truth dealers in a world that is dark and sick and in need of grace. And people will not find their way to grace if we are known as liars. They won't believe us when we tell the truth. Now, some have taken Jesus' words and all of this so literally that they refuse to take any oaths at all, even in a court of law. But I think they're missing the point. In fact, I don't think any of this is really even actually about oaths. I think it's about using words to deceive. And there's no room for that behavior in the kingdom. Jesus is building something, guys, and so he says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Just mean what you say and say what you mean. Just be a truth teller. That's what he's saying. Because your words matter. Tell the truth. A Jesus follower will live differently, and it's going to stand out like salt and light in this world. Jesus followers are called to radical truthfulness and integrity. We are called to be honest people, that we are to be honest with the oaths that you make, be honest with the contracts and the promises you make, be honest with all of your words, because any failure to keep your word is a sin before God, and your reputation may take a hit. But when you're a Jesus follower, that makes his reputation take a hit as well. And if people don't see you well, if your reputation suffers, that's just one little thing. But when people see Jesus wrong, people go to hell. There's something on the line here. Jesus kind of says that. I mean, if Jesus followers choose not to be radical with truthfulness, if we choose lies and we choose to break promises, Jesus says that we're submitting to the influence of the evil one, who is the father of lies. Now, could you just imagine with me? Could you just dream with me for a moment? Can you imagine what it would look like if a small community of people decide to live in this radical truthfulness? Can you imagine if a church like Cap City, decided that we were going to be people of integrity? Can you imagine a group of people honoring God with all of their words? Because if lying hurts Jesus' reputation, can you imagine what truth-telling could do? Imagine what it could do to our community. Imagine the impact it would make on this church, and that would be incredible, but imagine it beyond this church. I imagine businesses owned by Cap City members with impeccable reputations built on truth-telling. I imagine customers growing curious about Jesus because of the truthfulness of a company's service. I imagine Jesus' kingdom growing because of it. And I imagine being the guy in your neighborhood that everyone else comes to. Now, maybe you don't want to be that kind of a guy, but I think Jesus does. I think he wants you to be that kind of guy. Imagine being valued and appreciated by all of your neighbors because of the way that you uphold your word. And imagine how that would draw people to you during hard times, but more importantly, how it would draw people to Jesus. Imagine Cap City students all over town who turn in their work at school, and they're honest with their teachers, and they're willing to admit when they make a mistake or when they fall short. And imagine the kind of impact that would have on the adults and the administrators within their buildings, and imagine the impact that would have on the rest of the students in their classrooms, and it could very literally change eternity just by being truth tellers. Don't limit how far this could go. I imagine businesses calling our church office, asking if we know anyone that they could hire. I imagine businesses knowing the type of person that they're looking for and knowing that those are the kinds of people who are at Cap City. Because managers don't want to question time cards or work ethics. Managers don't want to question if a resume is accurate or true. They want integrity. They want truth tellers. Imagine if we were the place where people knew to find people like that. And imagine what that would do for Jesus. I mean, this could change your relationships. Imagine friends who know that they can trust you with their thoughts and their struggles. Imagine friends who come to you looking for truth and knowing that you'll give it to them with grace. Imagine friends who trust you to say the hard things to them. Imagine what would happen to Jesus' kingdom if you would tell the truth. And imagine what this would do to your marriage. Imagine the ways that the relationships with your spouse could grow if you trusted one another to be truth tellers. It's probably not a new idea for you. You probably felt those ways when you got married. Imagine if you lived like that, and what it could do for your marriage, what it could do for your kids, and what it could do for Jesus. Maybe you're in a dating season of life. You're in dating relationships. Can you imagine in that kind of a context what radical truthfulness could look like? Can you imagine being your true self, not just putting on a facade? This is going to feel like a tangent, but I promise this pulls together. I remember interviewing for a job at a church in 2009, and I'd gone through hours of questions with a group of men who were leading the church, and at the very end of it all, one of the guys spoke up and asked me, why should we believe anything that you said in this interview? Which I think he thought he was being clever. I found it offensive. But it caused me to work through some things in my mind, shaped how I viewed interviews. And what I've realized, what I've come to, is that it doesn't do any good to lie to someone that you want to have a long relationship with. It doesn't make sense to lie in interviews. It doesn't make sense to lie on resumes, because what if they believe them and they hire you under those pretenses and now you got to live up to something that you aren't? It's bad news. And isn't that what dating is? Dating is just interviewing people for a long relationship. And if you're entering into those places with lies, if you're trying to be someone that you aren't, then you're the one who's going to suffer the consequences. And so stop using the exaggerations, the half-truths, just to fool people. Let your character do the convincing, and then watch how that draws people to you. Because truth-telling is powerful. And Jesus' kingdom could get some really big wins out of this. Cap City, can you examine your speech this week? Do people trust your word? Do you have some trust that needs to be built back up? Do you always say things like to be honest or to tell the truth? Because you kind of have to add some things to get people to believe you so that you sound more trustworthy. Or is your word your bond? Is your yes or no enough? What would happen if you began just practicing simple honesty, even in small things? I'll tell you that one of the reasons I'm most optimistic about the future of the church is because as the world gets darker, the more bright we shine. And truth-telling is a really key, significant piece of that. I once had someone tell me that they didn't trust their preacher because they knew him to be a liar. And it wasn't surprising to me because I hang out with preachers all the time and they've got some problems. But it did bother me that my friend would choose to keep going to that church. And then over time, I've realized that's not completely fair. Because I should be bothered by any Jesus follower who could be known as a liar. I should be bothered by any brother or sister in Christ who has that reputation. And I think that you should be bothered by that too. Because it isn't just our reputation that's on the line. We represent Jesus. And honesty is a pretty big deal when it comes to eternity. And so stop telling your stories with your slants and your exaggerations to make yourself look better than you are. Just keep your word. If you'll say you'll do it, then do it. If you make a yes or if you make a no, then let your yes be yes, let your no be no. Reminds me a little bit of something that I hear John say all the time. John Sutphin, our executive pastor, he occasionally catches our staff with a really simple question. Our staff has been known to exaggerate or sensationalize stories from time to time. And John will respond with a very usually sarcastic, very usually, a jovial question. It's 2 words. You've maybe heard it too. John will look at you and say, "Tell Jesus." Can you follow Jesus in such a way that the words you say are honest and true? As if you were talking to Jesus himself? Because that's more important than the oaths that you make. It's more important than the things that you may swear. Jesus calls his followers to be radical truth tellers, to live with radical honesty and integrity. Because if we can't be trusted, if Jesus' followers cannot be trusted, if our reputation is to be one of liars or exaggerators or any of those kinds of things, our reputation takes a hit, sure, but his reputation takes a hit. And the way that Jesus called us to save the world is through our words. And if our words can't be trusted, then we're in a bad spot. When Jesus' reputation takes a hit, people go to hell. And so you'd better pay close attention to your words. This is not some small thing. This is a pretty big deal. You've been called to use your words to nudge and drag people towards Jesus. Can you be truthful? Maybe you're in a spot where you need to begin a relationship with Jesus. Maybe all of this is new for you. Maybe you're feeling a conviction today as we talk about this stuff in a way that you've never felt before. I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. If you're in a place where you want to begin following Jesus, I'd love to do that. The good news is that in the midst of all of our failures, he just keeps showing back up with grace and mercy. We don't meet the standard. He keeps loving us. That's the kind of God I want to serve. And so if that's you, if that's where you're at, I'd love to have a conversation with you. We've got an elder back in the corner of the room in our prayer room who'd love to pray with you if you got something going on. If you're being nudged today, don't ignore the work of the Holy Spirit. Respond. Let's stand and let's worship.